You tell me when to stop. Thank- Let's see. Let's see.
Hey everyone, just want to say we're going to get going here in about 5 minutes, so if everyone can make their way and find a seat, that would be great.
Like
Thank you, Cheryl, for beautiful music and welcoming us in. First order of business is the dreaded cell phone mute. That always, no matter how many times you ask, there's always that, sometime during a meeting or something, there's that interruption. I'm Jeff Tawney. I'll be your moderator this afternoon. First, a little, good news, bad news. When you're talking about the river and you're talking about waterways and you're talking to people that are interested, there's that conflict of, I love the river, I want to be on the river, I want to be outdoors, but then do I want to go indoors and listen to a conference and speakers talking about the river when I can be out enjoying it? So I would imagine there's a lot of people, had the weather been a little less favorable today, we probably would have more seats filled because people wouldn't want to be out there for their last ditch effort to get their river running in. So anyways, for those that are here, you are meant to be here. It only takes one person, one passion to make a change. So I would rather have a room full of people that are passionate about than have a whole room of people that don't want to do anything or don't really care. Because then you have all this wasted energy. And I think it was Monica was sharing with me earlier that sometimes you have to hear things multiple times for it to actually take. I'm one of those. I'm 65, coming on 66 years of age, and come to a place in my life where all of a sudden now I have all this new information that I never paid attention to about our environment. And it's a bittersweet problem because I find that as I know more and I become more educated, I become more conflicted on what I do. Years ago, I could simply throw a battery in the trash and not think twice about it. Now I have them collecting in the shop because I can't figure out where to put them. So anyways, education is good, and it has this great, and I'm just glad you guys are here. And if you're here, that means you were meant to be here. We have a lineup of some speakers today that are going to talk to us about the health of the river. They're going to talk to us about things that are happening and things that need to continue to happen. I was talking with Jerry White, who will be our first speaker, a little while ago, and the question I asked him is, when have we done enough? And Jerry said, it's a great question. And the question is if we have to keep asking if we've done enough, then maybe we haven't done enough. Someone you once told me when I was learning my craft that if you have to keep asking me if it's good enough, then it's not good enough. You need to go back and keep looking at it because obviously you're just looking for an out. So that's what we need to keep in mind is when have we done enough? And if we have to keep asking that question, then we need to keep looking at ourselves. So I want to welcome our guests, I welcome you, welcome our speakers, and we'll get started. Jerry White is the executive director of Riverkeeper. Jerry has been doing that for 10 years. Like many people who are passionate about what they do, not only does he do something that he does as his job, but he also goes above and beyond because he has a passion about it and volunteers in a lot of areas. So I asked him what he was going to do with his retirement from Riverkeeper, and he's probably be more involved in a lot of other things. So Jerry's going to come up and give us a presentation. We will have question and answer time after he's done. So if you have any questions, write them down, make a note, and we will give you an opportunity. Jerry White.
Thank you, Jeff. Let's see if I can get here we go. Sound check. Excellent. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for being here on this gorgeous day here in October. And I want to thank Monica and the Unity Spiritual Center for giving me this opportunity and frankly this privilege to be able to come up and talk to you all and also be here with a number of other parties like the West Plains Water Coalition and others who are here today to share with us so that we learn more about water and more about our own relationship with water and our own interface with water. What I'm going to do today is I am going to give you a basic, who is Riverkeeper, what is the Spokane River in some ways, and then what are some of the issues, right? And what I'd like to do is, I know we'll have a question-answer period afterwards, but this is a broad presentation rather than a highly specialized presentation. So I've got a few things I'd like to actually pinpoint to dive into at the end of this. But if you all want to take a deeper dive, let's get into that after this. Because frankly, any one of these PowerPoint slides, I could probably spend an hour or more, and some of them far more, because I really do feel, even after 10 years, I can really say that I love the river in the truest sense, and this subject is close to my heart. So let's just get into it and talk a little bit, if I can, and technically challenged here, but get into, here we go, that's back, there we go. So who is the Spokane Riverkeeper? Spokane Riverkeeper is an organization that's a nonprofit, right? And we really are an advocate for your Spokane River. And, you know, the best way to explain this is we leverage laws, we get involved in policy making, but we also do a number of things that we're going to show you today to get right out in the river and pick up litter. We have Liv Kindle, who is an employee at Riverkeeper, who is specializing in our river litter coordination and has picked up already many, many thousands of pounds of litter from the banks of the river this year. So we interact with the river in a number of ways. We're members of the Waterkeeper Alliance, which is a global organization for water. I have stood next to esteemed people across the earth, one of whom I'll just tell you is the Tigris Riverkeeper, Nabil Musa. And having the privilege and the opportunity to be around some of these people who are so passionate is amazing. So all across the earth, there are people working for water. The Spokane River, here's a shot of the Spokane River on a day very like today in October. Runs, we'll talk a little bit about where that comes from, and I'm just going to talk about the river itself for a few minutes. So I don't love this, true disclosure here, I don't love this map. It leaves off one of the finest tributaries in the basin, but it is illustrative of where the river begins and ends for our purposes. Coeur d'Alene Lake, on the right side of this photograph, is where the Riverkeeper begins our work. And the river exits the Coeur d'Alene Lake with surface water from the lake, runs all the way through the Spokane Valley down to the Columbia River at a place called Two Rivers, 111 miles long. And that's a general layout. Hangman Creek or Latah Creek, it's often called both things. You'll hear Latah Creek sometimes runs in from Idaho from the south and runs to the north into the river and joins in the city of Spokane. And then we have the Little Spokane River, which runs from the north to the south into the river above 9 Mile. We also have Shimakin Creek, which is another major tributary, and there's some smaller tributaries as well. The watershed itself starts way up on the Bitterroot Divide, right? In the headwaters of the St. Joe River and the Coeur d'Alene River. But for our purposes, we call the Coeur d'Alene Lake the origin. Here's a shot that shows, you know, those tributary rivers way up in the mountains of Idaho into Montana. Does not show that, you can just see the word Columbia. That's the Columbia River where the Spokane River joins. So here is a photo of the Spokane Valley Rathdrum Prairie Aquifer, which really is the lifeblood of the river. A lot of times people say, look, what's the source of the Spokane? And we can say, well, the Coeur d'Alene Lake. The truth is, this aquifer, which is a vast body of water that underlies the ground from Pondere Lake all the way down to around Lake Spokane there, that actually as well is a source to our river. And we're going to show you just a few slides that give you the dynamics of how that works. So in effect, the aquifer feeds our river. You may also understand or know that the aquifer is designated a sole source of drinking water by the EPA, and is immensely important for our own health, safety, and well-being. We all drink from the aquifer, unless you live out in Cheney or another place that are on other wells, or maybe up in the Little Spokane Valley. But even now in the Little Spokane drainage, Whitworth Water is on to aquifer water in some cases. So this is a tremendous source of drinking water as well. This is a little diagram that just shows you a very rough schematic of how the aquifer joins surface water, which would be the Spokane River. And I don't think I have a map on this of the specific places that the aquifer feeds the river, but suffice it to say that right around Miraboo or around Sullivan Road, you begin to see the aquifer joining the Spokane River. Now above that, from Coeur d'Alene Lake down, the river actually feeds the aquifer. So it's this beautiful, remarkable, reciprocal relationship that the river and the aquifer have. So the water runs out of Coeur d'Alene Lake, drops into the aquifer, and then pops back up from Sullivan Road all the way to downtown Spokane, and even slightly below downtown, and feeds the Little Spokane and the Spokane River. We want to recognize the Spokane tribe and the Coeur d'Alene tribe as original inhabitants of this landscape. We are standing on the ancestral grounds of the Middle Spokane people who fished for salmon for millennia. Depending on the perspective, it's since time immemorial. Through a scientific lens, sometimes that can be as far back as 10,000 years, but possibly much longer. And these civilizations were and continue to be based on the Chinook salmon runs that entered the river every year. These fish spawned in the gravels of the Spokane River, and then those fish hatched out of these gravels and then out-migrated to the Pacific Ocean to spend 3 to 5 years before returning back up and providing people a sustenance and a lifeway. It's important to know that Spokane people would process salmon, put up a surplus, trade surpluses all the way out to the Great Plains for bison meat and back and forth. So these were extraordinarily complex relationships, all based on this ecology and this beautiful animal, and one of the greatest migrations on Earth. Columbia River, largest salmon river on the face of the earth, until the hydro system for the Columbia River interrupted that. Here's a beautiful photo of a little red band trout. These fish are still endemic, they're still extant, and they live in the Spokane River. And this photo was taken by Tim Connor. I've had the privilege of swimming with Tim in the river and taking these photos. These fish are gorgeous native residents. And if you ever get a chance, you don't have to go to Hawaii to see gorgeous fish in the water. These are a beautiful little fish and this was a juvenile, and they're very curious, and they'll come swim up to you and see you. What are the issues with the Spokane River? Why do we need a riverkeeper? Why do we need someone to advocate for your river? Why do we have numerous other parties in our basin working on behalf of the river? Some of whom are in this room, by the way. We have a number of issues. We have heavy metals that have been left over in the upper basin in Idaho from mining. We still have heavy metals running into the Spokane River during high water. You may have heard Coeur d'Alene Lake is of great concern because there's a lot of heavy metals locked up in the bottom sediments of the lake. And we You know, if we see that lake eutrophy, that will release a lot of those metals into our beautiful river. We have toxic pollutants that are everywhere in our environment. I was telling Jeff a little earlier, the sad fact of it is, if you were to take blood from everyone sitting in this room, myself included, some 45% of us would show positive, unfortunately positive results for the existence of PFAS, a perfluorinated chemical in our blood. So these toxics are in our river, and because of that interface between the aquifer and the river, they're a great concern to ecosystems and even to our own health. So we're going to hear more about that with the West Plains Water Coalition, talking about specifically PFAS contamination of groundwater and private wells. So that's one we work with in surface water. Water quantity, more and more with global climate change, water flow is a critical issue. When I started, you know, this was getting some attention in the community, and we worked hard on water quality, and typically, other than the in-stream flow rule, we didn't concern ourselves too much with water quantity. Increasingly, this is a very serious issue that we're beginning to tilt into as advocates now. We have a lot of shoreline destruction that I'll walk you through, and the sediment and nutrient and temperature pollution continues to be a problem. And then we do work at Riverkeeper. Well, the river issue, we have native trout and salmon. As I talked about, we work on those issues. Salmon are being recovered by the Upper Columbia United Tribes in our region right now. And as a part of that, trying to recover those little red band trout is an effort as well. We only have some 300 red band trout per mile in the lower river near downtown Spokane. To give you some perspective, in Montana, we're talking 2,000 to 3,000 and sometimes more fish per mile in a highly rich river like that. So we don't have enough, you know, we feel like there's a ceiling on these red band trout, and we need to figure that out. And then we have unknowns, microplastic, PFAS, and there are chemicals that are now coming from the road and storm waters that are put into tires, orthophosphates, I believe, that are a concern as well. So there's a lot of things that enter our river that are a problem. We have 7 dams. This is a photo of Little Falls Dam. Those have drastically changed the ecosystems. And so we do work on some of the issues associated with those dams. And then we have pollution, and a little bit of Clean Water Act jargon to throw at you is point source. That is pollution that comes out of a pipe, and non-point source is pollution that is running in from diffuse sources off the landscape. So I'll try not to throw too much jargon at you, but point source, you can point at it, it's a pipe or a conveyance. Non-point source, rain is falling, snow is falling on the land, melting, and in it comes from the landscape. You can't point at it, it's a non-point source. We have contaminated soils and groundwaters. Probably one of the largest sources, there's multiple sources of contamination. Again, just to call out John and West Plains Water Coalition, we're going to hear a little more about that from the airports and the PFAS pollution that is contaminated groundwater. But we also have sources that are directly adjacent to the river. We have polychlorinated biphenyl pollution that enters our river from the groundwater. These are called PCBs. They're a chlorinated chemical. And they enter in regions like the Kaiser aluminum area, where Kaiser rolled out aluminum. It got booted up in the war effort to build B-29s, rolled out aluminum, and purchased PCBs from that were called Aerochlor PCBs, put that in the oil because it was a great product. It would disallow the oil from burning up under great heat and stress. Unfortunately, in those days, nobody really knew much about or thought much about these pollutants being harmful. So they ended up in great plumes in the soil. Now we have groundwater running through them, and that's running into the river in some cases. That's an example of just one of the groundwater sources. We have river and lake sediments that are a problem at times, wastewater effluent and stormwater runoff, and then a whole bunch of acronyms here. As I said, PCBs, PBDEs are a fire retardant. So a fire retardant, if you look at these seats, okay, now I'm going to try not to scare you all, okay? This is one of the hazards, is after a presentation, I'd be really careful because people are like, can you swim in the river? It sounds terrible. You can swim in the river. The river is actually, in some cases, much healthier than it was in the 1940s, 50s, or 60s, thanks to extremely high-end wastewater treatment technology that's been put on and invested in large part by you all, to intercept pollutants. So swim in the river. I love swimming in the river. Go do it. The water is clean to swim in. But when, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how these toxics accumulate in the river in other ways. But for example, PBDEs is a fire retardant that often is found in coatings on things like the upholstery that you're sitting on. So that gets on your clothes when you sit on this. You go to throw your clothes in the wash. The wastewater goes out to wastewater treatment plants. Guess where it goes from there? Into the river. So the Spokane River does have PBDEs accumulating in the ecosystems as a function of our use, everyday household use of this stuff. And then temperature is one that looms on the horizon, right? With global climate change, we're all looking at the gorgeous day we love today. And I don't want to ruin that. I'm not going to ruin that for you, but we do see this trend in temperature, but also other kinds of trends like crazy weather happening, and that has an impact on the river. Specifically, nighttime temperatures that don't get low anymore in the summer, and that's when we need to cool water down. Let's talk about this one for a minute. Bioaccumulation. It's a big word that simply means that toxics accumulate in fish. Bioaccumulation means that in any biological organism, when you dump toxics on top of an ecosystem, those toxics sometimes can begin to accumulate in fish. PCBs, as a matter of fact, I believe they're hydrophilic. They don't like water, and they love carbon or fat. So they're always searching for a place to bond with soil, carbon, or fat. So what they do is they grab organic organisms will biofilm on the bottom of the river, small insects, then a small fish will eat the insects, then a larger fish eats the smaller fish, and then possibly an osprey, a blue heron. You have these gorgeous photos of the waterfowl. Those critters eat small insects and fish. And people eat fish. And unfortunately, those PCBs love to get in the fat tissue and into the brains of animals like this salmon, but also trout or large-scale suckers or carp. So if people are eating those, they risk taking up those chemicals themselves. There's a number of ways to mitigate that. One is you want to skin your fish before you eat them, and don't eat the head. And as bizarre as that sounds, we have many, many cultures in our communities, some of whom will make a soup out of a whole fish, and then they're going to be at a higher risk to take up those nutrients. And there are, with the Department of Health, fish advisories. But this particular issue is one we pay a lot of attention to. There are laws on the books called a human health criteria, and that human health criteria drives the water quality standard. So that means permits to discharge pollution are often determined by the human health criteria if there's a pollutant that will bioaccumulate, right? So PCBs is one of them that we are all struggling with in this community that was used all through the 20th century. I think they began marketing them in 1929, is that about right? 29. They were outlawed in 1979, but they still exist. They're produced inadvertently in pigments and inks. So those things bioaccumulate. There's a standard for them. It's an enormously difficult standard to meet for wastewater dischargers. It's clear that we're going to have to wrestle with this one into the future with trying to prevent these things from even getting into the wastewater systems. Water consumption is huge. I took this photo. We are in the 98th percentile in our city for water use in the country, in the nation. So the city and the county are both working pretty hard to try to understand this phenomena and then pull peak demand of that water use off, because what we know is that water consumption is largely driven in many ways by irrigation. I think inside the city limits, the number is 24% is industrial. But actually, it's municipal, it's this right here that's the culprit for most of the water that we're using, is wasting water. For a long time, this was not really an issue. Let's see if the next, yeah, for a long, here's a slide. This is hard to read from where you're at, but this basically shows Spokane County in the higher percentile of water use. This is actually showing gallons consumed per person per day. As far as I can tell, this number, you can measure it in different ways. So I've heard everything from 235 gallons per person per day up to clear up to 300 gallons per person per day. It probably varies, right? The thing is that back to that water use, we know it quadruples in the summer, and that use is really irrigation. It's outdoor, it's keeping your lawns green. So what the city is doing now, we're advocating for, what the county is working on to some degree, is trying to shave off that peak demand in the summer. Be smarter about our water use. Because what we know, I think, yes, I'll pick the thread up. We used to not worry about this. We have this aquifer, right? We have this massive aquifer, trillion gallons, it's many billion gallons a day moving through a certain point. It seems inexhaustible. But the fact is, the river depends on this aquifer. And actually, we compete in some limited cases with the river at low flow periods. In the municipal, in Spokane, we now know that the high pumping during the summer at critical low flow periods can have an impact into the aquifer infusing into the river. The river gains close to 600 million gallons a day. It's 595 million gallons a day. Feeds the river in the summer. And in the critical low flow periods of the summer, that water is essential. It's cold, it's clean, it's absolutely essential. So when we're taking that water, to some degree, through aggressive pumping to irrigate green lawns in the summer, and you saw that photo, much of it being evaporated and wasted, that in some ways you can say, well, that's water that should be in the river. We got down to 720 cubic feet per second this year, which the lowest flow we're supposed to get to is 800 cubic feet per second. Think of a cubic foot of water about the size of a basketball. So 850 of those flowing past a point on the riverbank in 1 second, that amount of water. That's the lowest our river should get. And we got down to 720, and we had a snowpack that was 110% this year. So we are all, whether we like it or not, dealing with a climate that is really changing on us fast, very quickly. In order to keep our river resilient, we have to be, I think, Riverkeeper's line is we have to be more mindful. We can attack this issue in multiple ways: smart irrigation, investing in different composition of plants in our lawns, and then also thinking hard about where we're going to wholesale water, such as the city of Spokane wholesales water out to other cities. We're going to have to start thinking about all that. We may want to be thinking about putting some of our municipal water rights into trust for the river. Here's a look, and sorry, this is a little bit of a hall of horrors here for you for a minute. It's not hopeless, but this is a tough one. This is a very famous graph. This was put together by the Sustainability Action Subcommittee, and this is a mouthful, but it was the Water Resources Collaboration Work Group. And you know, they put together basically guidance for the city of Spokane to guide the sustainable use of water into the future. And this graph came from that. And what this thing is looking at 7-day low flows, and then averaging those, putting that point on a graph. So each point there is the 7 lowest flow days for that summer. And you can see the trend line. I mean, this graph is very useful because it allows you to see what's happening. This was taken from the Spokane gauge, just below downtown Spokane, which is where is a gaining reach. That's where our river is being fed with all this aquifer water. And it's the oldest gauge in Washington State. It goes back to, I think it's 1891 was when that started. So those are from 1891 to 2020, and this is what it looks like. So we are looking at declining flows. A fellow named John Porcello did some work with several other hydrologists and really looked at this macro declining flows. And it's pretty clear that climate change is the culprit. So for us, water consumption is not a silver bullet. It's not like we're going to cure, this. But what it does do is it gives every single one of us sitting in this room the opportunity to do something positive for our river and our community, to keep that river a little more resilient in the face of this changing climate. So it's a way to that's how I look at it. Not a cure-all, but certainly a way to contribute to a positive, the idea to keep our river a little more sustainable. Land use and shorelines. This is another House of Horrors photo. This is up by the border of Idaho. This is a Hangman Creek or Latah Creek. Let me digress for 1 minute. I call Latah Creek Hangman Creek in deference to local tribes who have actually personally asked me to continue to call it that. That name calls back the lynching of tribal members in 1858 on the shores of this creek. And so if I offend anyone, I don't mean to. I'm simply deferring to people who don't want to forget that history. So this is an issue that actually is a bright spot too. The state of Washington is doing a really, I would say, a first-class job in returning, providing the funding to get all kinds of parties out onto the shorelines. The Spokane County Conservation District, the Lands Council, who you may have heard of or members of. The Spokane tribe is working out there, as is the Coeur d'Alene tribe. All of these Spokane Riverkeepers out there doing 50 acres of riparian recovery now. All of these parties are working hard and have been for years. I believe Spokane County is involved in other ways, the generation of the clean water guidance for this as well. So this has received a lot of focus, and we feel like this is a bright spot in the future. It's going to be a long time, but we will get to a recovered Hangman Creek one day. And we are seeing salmon exit the system, being planted in the system, and we'll one day see salmon come back. The Coeur d'Alene tribe is actively planting fish there now. This is a problem. Hangman Creek's been beat up on by so many factors, and this is just showing you a roadway. It's actually showing you two problems. One, there's a horse operation, these lines. There's round bales being forked across the road and fed to horses on the bank. But the bigger problem probably here is you can see how this creek runs into this road. So there's all kinds of issues, and they're slowly being taken care of. It will be a long road. And this is what it looks like. And I have, full transparency. This was during a flood event. So this is amplified. This is the worst of the worst. But every year you can go to just above, what you're looking at, let me talk about that. This is the Spokane River coming in from the left, and then Hangman Creek coming in from the right. And you have these muddy soils coming off of the Palouse and, coming into the Spokane River. So this is what the problem looks like at its worst. This is the river having a real tantrum here, right? That tantrum is made worse by our land use. Urban litter. Here you go, Liv. This is one for you. This is Liv's job, being out there working on these issues. We have litter from all kinds of sources. And because we do live in an urban river, all, water finds a way. All things flow downhill to the river. So again, the thing to remember here is every time somebody throws something out of the window of their car, it's going to find its way to water. Unfortunately, we have a poverty issue in our state and our world right now, and many, many people, frankly, priced out of the ability to keep a roof over their heads. We have an opioid epidemic. We have a mental health crisis. These are all related to the kinds of problems you're seeing here, because this was, frankly, people who could not take care of themselves, were not taking care of themselves physically, and therefore not taking care of the river around them, and left this in a camp. So, at Riverkeeper, we have a homeless outreach program that Liv's a part of as well. So we've put Frontier Behavioral Health, Spokane Neighborhood Action Programs, and Chaz Health on the river, row down the river, hand out garbage bags, do outreach about picking up garbage and keeping a clean camp. Even I was on the river here last week and grabbed about 70 pounds of garbage from a camp. Riverkeeper here, any garbage for us? And out they came, because Liv's been building those relationships. Jewel Schultz is another staff member. They've been building those relationships with people on the river, and now some of that's getting bagged up. Out they come. So this is a slow process. Again, not a silver bullet. It's simply a small part of the way in which Riverkeeper is trying to make a difference to all of our communities who find themselves along the river, right? There's a lot of ways to be affecting our river. As we've talked about, everything from spraying upholstery to pouring paint down the drain, to being careless with litter, or finding yourself in a desperate situation where you're unable to care for yourself appropriately, and you simply don't see yourself as having a choice but to throw your garbage on the bank of the river. This is a real reality. This is the boat as we got done with cleaning this up. This is a star raft donated by Flow Adventures, one of our supporters, and John Wilmot runs that. He's down on the river all the time with us. there are some people, there are many, many river keepers in this community. Some of you, I'm sure, are too, who take their own personal time to go down and care and pull together to pull this stuff off the bank of the river. So our work, I'm watching the clock here. We're doing pretty good so far. Doing all right? So, as I said, Waterkeeper Alliance is 350 members now across the earth. We are a member of that. We use education, science, law, and policy, and I'm gonna actually kind of shorten this up. I'm going to move through this fairly quickly and then open it up to questions. All of these are is our advocacy. So we heard about education earlier. Jeff talked a little bit about that. Very, very, very important, right? We have a clean water defense program. That's largely me, looking after policies and laws that affect the river. We have a science program. So if you all want to get involved, you could get involved through the litter program and the voluntary program there, or you could come collect sediment water quality samples. We had 30 volunteers hitting the river throughout the winter taking water quality samples. And then we are actually now, we have a quality assurance protocol for that data. That data goes to ecology and looks after the health of the river. We also have a crayfish program that's really popular. You can go catch crayfish and look at heavy metals in the river. Lives and Jewel Schultz, our litter pickup program, and I'll talk just a minute about that in a sec. And then we do a little bit with access, not so much. We sort of support access. We have the Spokane River Forum working on access. We kind of give them a boost, or they give us a boost, but we work just to support their work. And then water quantity, as I've already talked about. The Clean Water Act of 1972 has really done amazing things for our river. Expo 74 was celebrated in 1974, 2 years after the Clean Water Act was passed, with a sweeping suite of law that allowed us to really begin to clean ourselves up. This is a photo of the, anybody know what river this is? Yes, it is, the Cuyahoga River. It caught fire famously, I think 13 times, but it was caught by a prominent journalist one time, and that really galvanized the nation to do a lot of soul searching around our waterways. And frankly, in the 60s, I used to go fish for salmon with my grandfather on the Willamette River. That began for me in the early 70s. Those were dark times. I mean, still on the Willamette in Oregon, I mean, it was a very polluted river. So they were trying to come into compliance with the Clean Water. But the Clean Water Act has turned us around, and the Spokane River is no different. We have a very, very clean river in many ways. We've gotten so much of the phosphorus off the river and other issues, even many toxics now off of the river because of high-end filtration at the wastewater treatment plants based on this law. We do youth outreach and get out with young people when we have the capacity, and we work with the Salish School of Spokane and environmental education program with them, which is really a wonderful program. Finding an illicit, polluted. We haven't had too many cases of this. This was one we found that was discharging hot water. So we got after that, and they did the right thing. This was a company that didn't even know it was going on. There was a technician in the back room somewhere that was like, well, we hook this pipe up and get rid of our hot water. So they fixed the problem without any problems. So we just called their attention to it. We are a group that has actually, we have 4 vessels now on the water. Yeah. So this is a big one. Liv is at the oars of a boat similar to this. The Star Raft that you saw. This is Jewel Schultz. And so we really do pride ourselves with being on river all the time. This is a little boat donated by the Red Band Rally at Spokane Indians baseball team to get people out and just tour them. Of course, I'm doing this a lot, talking to people, and enjoy that immensely. And then the Community Litter Pickup Program, which has been a huge success. And this is a bunch of old statistics, but I really wanted... So the program is one wherein any one of you, or as a group, you could come to us and say, we want to do a litter pickup. Liv will organize the pickers and the bags and meet you on rivers at a location that she knows needs a little TLC, and then you all can pick up, and we'll put the litter in a appointed spot. The city picks it up. On some occasions, we'll run it out to the waste treatment center. So that's one, and then we do public events. So Earth Day, we have a huge event to come together and pick up litter. But the numbers are staggering for 2023. You can see this chart's old, 2022, in progress. 2023, we're almost, this season, at 40,000 pounds of litter off the bank of the river with 1,900 volunteers. So that's in large part possible because of a public participation grant. I'm going to just keep blasting through here because I'm going a little long. So this is an example of a piece of litigation we put together for the EPA that's really in large part turned Hangman Creek, or been another positive step in the long series of steps to improve Hangman Creek. And we talked about science. I'm just going to blast through here. Homeless outreach, talked about that. And I'm going to open it up to questions because I'm sure there are some. I took some before the presentation. Yes?
A number of us in this room have worked on the issue of the toxicity of the agricultural application of what they call biosolids. It's sewage sludge. And you attributed progress to the health of the river to the quality of the wastewater treatment plants. But what they do with that is they extract the solids out of the sewage and then promote its use on agriculture. And when I looked at the non-point pollution, it looked like cropland. What do you think about that?
Absolutely, great question. So this gets thrown into the bag of, we're making all this stuff, what do we do with it? So since the Middle Ages, the solution has been chuck it in the river and it'll go away, right? We've dumped untold, all of our garbage has gone, you can hear tales of London in the ancient times, and it was so, the Thames River was so polluted. We've carried that paradigm to present day. But now we're confronted with things that won't go away, right? And this is why these chemicals like PFAS, chemicals like PCBs, many of these chemicals are escaping through wastewater treatment and getting through in the effluent in liquid form and going into the river. A bunch of others are ending up in biosolids, and then marketed or basically discharged to ag fields, where they can cause problems in other ways. What I think of it, which is what you asked me, is that we've got to get way out in front of this process and begin, it's a multi-pronged approach. One is where we have crisis situations from discharging, whether that's biosolids or effluent, we've got to be trying to build a better mousetrap and remove those pollutants from the environment, from the pathway. Stop doing that. Stop discharging some of this stuff and deal with it in different ways. But really, the ultimate solution is quit producing these chemicals that are forever chemicals that don't go anywhere. Right? PFAS is a family with hundreds of constituents of chemicals. You can make laws against a couple of them, and then chemists build another one that's just outside the law. We got to quit with that value system and begin to realize that this stuff doesn't go away. We're going to consume it. The ecosystem will consume it. So it's a daunting issue. Probably not a satisfying answer. We've got to create different alternatives to what we're making and building. And there are certain crisis situations, I think, where we've got to say, oops, we're letting this stuff get out into the environment. Stop that here. I personally believe that we need to ultimately quit discharging effluent to our waterways. That's not going to happen soon, not going to happen fast. Many people tell me it's impossible. I think it can be done, but it's that kind of thing, Morton, where, so That's my answer, probably not very satisfying, but.
Hi. What are the barriers to increased riverside dining experiences?
Interesting. The riverside dining experiences, what are barriers to that?
Well, if you go to Coeur d'Alene, you can eat by water.
Yeah,
Here, you can eat at Anthony's only, and it's really not on the water,
yeah.
period. Why not? Why can't we eat by the water here? Isn't that another constituency that, talking about putting crap on the water, eating by crap, people wouldn't want to do,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera?
It's a good question. I think, and let me come at that one a roundabout way too. So remember, Spokane, this city, well, the city is 10,000 years old, honestly. The oldest, constantly occupied urban space in the state that we know of was down at the confluence of People's Park, the Hangman Creek and the Spokane River. In the 1870s, the city was identified by the rail company as a great place to have a railhead. That began the development of Spokane, which really largely was developed with an industrial center. In that industrial activity, you had dry cleaning places pop up. I mean, famously, there was a sawmill that was dumping sawdust. And you had many, many other industrial activities that were just dumping everything from raw sewage to industrial waste into the river. People quickly understood, and they probably had in their head, don't get by the river, don't go to the river. And they would not let their kids play there. I've talked to people who grew up this way. The river was really a garbage sluiceway. What we have really got to do, in my opinion, is we've got to turn the corner. And I think Expo 74 was the beginning of this. But this city is still trying to undertake the project of turning the corner on the way we see the river, turn all of our buildings back towards the river, and embrace the river. When you find that, when you find a population that really begins to, I'll use that word, own the river, really see it as a part of themselves, you're going to see entrepreneurs begging for the opportunity and really pushing on the city leadership to be able to construct these ways in which we can look out on the river and enjoy the river as we eat. We can launch a kayak right downtown. We can do all these things that are interactive because we like the river, we love the river, and it's no longer seen as a conveyance for our garbage. That's what I think has got to happen. This city's got a ways to go.
Yeah, quick question. I understand when we started, the city started the water restrictions, they were announcing that the reason was the minimum in-stream flow was dropping below 1,000 cubic feet a second.
Right.
I know that the Department of Ecology, and I guess you brought the figure up, established that the minimum in-stream flow they wanted to see in the Spokane River, at least through downtown Spokane, was 800 cubic feet per second.
850.
850.
Right. Yeah.
So, well, as you mentioned, and I noticed that the minimum in-stream flow dropped all the way down to the low 720 that you mentioned.
Right.
So what happens when it drops below 850?
Right. Well, that's part of the problem here, is that in substance, not a lot can happen. That in-stream flow is what's called junior in water rights speak. It's junior to many other water rights. So the big water consumers, for example, the city of Spokane, can continue to pump because their water right is actually older, first in time, first in right. Their water right is older and is protected. I don't believe that. They also, the other thing that's going on is there's a municipal law. Rob, you probably know more about this than me, but there's a municipal law that was passed in 2003 that water draw isn't going to be interrupted. So there's sort of a mosaic of laws that, for example, don't shut pumping down, which might help, as I've just made the case, would help part of that. But there's also just nature, which isn't giving us enough water to satisfy. Yes, go ahead.
In addition to what you were saying here, when flows drop below a certain level, and as part of the license agreement, the FERC license agreement with Avista, then the Post Falls Dam will actually let out more water. And so it actually, more water then comes out of Coeur d'Alene Lake if flows reach a certain level late in the summer.
Yeah. Let me jump on that point, because that's an interesting one. You have, you get down to 500 at Post Falls in drought conditions, right?
Post Falls would typically operate at 500 CFS during the summer when it's being held at its summer.
Right.
That's a typical flow. And then, but if the flows in Spokane drop below a certain level, then the Post Falls Dam would then up its flow to 600 CFS to let more water out from the dam to augment flows. That was part of it.
It might have been. I've not actually seen that happen, though. Like, I watched flows this summer. We were down to 720, and it stayed really right at 500.
Okay, well, that's not the terms of the FERC agreement. I can tell you that.
Interesting. Okay. This is why I love these things. You learn more every time you. So there's. It sounds like the Federal Energy, the Regulatory Commission has got some rules in there to try to mitigate some of that. But in large part, that law is highly symbolic more than anything. It allows the state to not issue new water rights. That's one thing. We have Airway Heights saying we want a water right in the aquifer. How are they going to get that water right when we're already a basin that's got an in-stream flow and we don't make that? Then that protects against new water rights being approved. So it is kind of interesting. That in-stream flow, in my mind, becomes more value probably symbolically. So how are we doing for time? We ready?
I would say maybe we could take one more question. I know Paige had a question
Okay,
here.
sure.
And then we could maybe move on.
I don't know if my question is the most important question,
Oh, yeah.
but as a citizen, I feel like the ways that I can support the river are by supporting advocates and by advocating and by reducing my consumption, not just water consumption, but consumption
Yeah.
in sort of a general way. But when I look at these problems, I know there are policy solutions that have to be in place, but a lot of times I think there are engineering issues. And I wonder if you know anything about how many grants are available, what the state is doing to look into different kinds of engineering systems for, as you say, getting to a place where we don't have to have any effluent at all. Because I know there are experimental projects in Europe that I've heard of, but they seem kind of small and obscure. So I just wondered if that's too utopian to be thinking about, or what?
No. I can't speak to how many grants are available. Again, I might defer to Mr. Rob Lindsay with the county here right now. But I will say on that subject that the state revolving fund supports upgrades in wastewater treatment plant, and there are other funds that have come available. And the 5 large dischargers in our river have upgraded substantially as a part of a cleanup plan for dissolved oxygen. And I would guess a lot of that, it's public money, but a lot of it does come through grants, I would think. That you have Kaiser Aluminum right now at they're testing ultraviolet light destruction of polychlorinated biphenyls, right? So there's some interesting things going on. I don't know if you wanted to add to anything, Rob, on that, but.
Well, I would just take a moment to thank you for reminding people about the superior water quality treatment that we have. Again, thank you. Again, everybody, my name is Rob Lindsay. I work for Spokane County Public Works. I'm the Environmental Services Administrator, and part of the scope of my job is overseeing our wastewater treatment facility, a relatively new one that was built in 2010. But I'm here as a citizen today, born and raised in this community, earth scientist by education. I moved back here with my family in my middle age to really work on cleaning up the river. I can tell you, as a citizen, as a taxpayer here, and as one who is invested in cleaning up the river, we should be proud of our wastewater treatment facilities. They lead the state, if not the nation, in terms of nutrient treatment. And it's one of the reasons why we talk about toxics here at a level that few other communities are right now. Because we've checked the box for nutrients. Very few other communities have at this point. And so Jerry speaks of the filtration that we have here. And just, to give you a sense of comparison, we use regular treatment technology using filtration and chemical, biological treatments like most treatment plants. And then we take that very same effluent and we put it through a filter that's 5 times smaller than your typical backpacking filter. So the water that comes out of our facilities is crystal clear. I'm not going to say that it's drinking water standards, but it's certainly to swimming standards. There's no sediment in it. We remove over 99% of the toxics that we currently measure. And we really are achieving significant performance in our facilities. We have a long way to go, like Jerry said. Are we checking all the boxes? Well, we have cleanup standards that, frankly, we have a hard time even measuring at this point. But that's okay. I mean, that's where we are. And that's not a complaint. It's just an observation. But indeed, we have a great treatment facility here, and we have a ways to go, but I just wanted to say thank you for reminding everybody about that.
You bet, Rob. Well, I'll just come back to Jeff to say, really that question of when are we clean enough? It remains a central question. And Riverkeeper has a perspective on that. Others in the community have a perspective on that. And of course, for us, we're pretty idealistic. We want to be pristine. But I appreciate all your patience and thank you. And if you have other questions, email me. We have an event, Spokane River, which is a benefit at the Montvale on November 16th. I'd love to see everybody down there to support your river. Thank you.
And thank you for your 10 years of service too, Jerry.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
that. Yeah.
Okay, Monica is going to come up and share a little bit, and then after that we'll be going to break.
Yes, we will. Thank you so much. And thank you, Jerry. That was so educational. When I moved to Spokane and I began learning about our river system, I was just so amazed by the aquifer that we have. Our aquifer is one of the largest aquifers in the country, and we receive this beautiful, clean snowmelt from the Rocky Mountains, which charges it. However, with my past experience, and I've been in the environmental field for about 30 years, I started by working in the hazardous waste recycling industry. I studied hazardous waste management at UC Davis, and I quickly learned the toxicology aspects and exposure limits and effects of chemicals on human bodies. And when I moved to Spokane, I was really fascinated by our river. I became concerned when I started hearing more about the mining upstream and the sewage discharge happening into the river from upstream. I agree, our Spokane sewage discharge and treatment facility is amazing. I wish it was further upstream, but it's toward the end, past the city, opposed to up high, and I'm really not sure how Idaho recycles at their sewage treatment facilities, as well as Medical Lake and Post Falls. But those definitely are some hot spots to be concerned about and be a little bit aware of. We do have a lot of chemicals that come into our river just from our daily uses, as Jerry mentioned. The clothes I'm wearing, the carpet, the seat you're sitting on contains PFAS. We have, large industrial companies that have worked and operated in Spokane many, many years who discharge PCBs into the river, and that's something that my friend Morton and Paige know about. I'm also a Sierra Club volunteer, and Sierra Club started a lawsuit 10 years ago, actually, to try to set TMDL limits on what some of these companies can discharge into the river. And it took 10 years, and I know other environmental groups were involved in this as well, but there will be limits set on what could be discharged into the river by the end of this year. So TMDL stands for Total Maximum Daily Load. And that's going to be huge for our river because it's going to minimize the chemicals that could be discharged into it. What I find really exciting, and I agree with Jerry, I believe waste minimization is our key. I believe we as citizens, everyone sitting in this room, if we could just be conscious of the products that we're using and what we're putting down the drain or flushing down our toilets, we will be so much better off. So for example, pharmaceuticals, that's something we can't control. I was thinking about it this morning and I thought, 30 years ago, I don't believe my grandparents were taking 10 pharmaceutical medications, but that's very common today. So obviously that is ending up in our rivers. Any cleaning products that we use. And I brought my little special bag here today because I wanted to create a real simple visual on ways that we could actually make a difference and how we can make an impact. And another thing that we need to consider, because today is all about water, our air is important as well. And what ends up in our garbage ends up being burned in our incinerator, which is particulate in the air that could end up in our waterways as well, not to mention on the ground. And we absorb things into our bodies in many different ways. For example, water. We absorb water when we take a shower or soak in the tub. We cook with water, we drink water. These are all cumulative impacts on our bodies. And forever chemicals like the PFAS Jerry was touching on, that John will be touching on more, and PCBs are chemicals that bioaccumulate in our body. What that means is they never flush out of our system. We only generate more and more and more, and they could lead to serious health defects and cancer, et cetera. So minimization and preventative maintenance, I believe, is the best way to go. So, for example, cleaning with vinegar instead of heavy, harsh chemicals like bleach and Clorox. If you need to clear the drain in your house, a wonderful young lady by the name of Samantha taught me this trick. You put a little baking soda in the drain, vinegar, and you pour boiling water down the drain and it clears it like a champ. You don't need to use liquid plumber. Any kind of containers that we use, if you have a favorite restaurant and you love to get fast food, maybe ask them, gosh, would you guys consider using paper instead of styrofoam or plastic? If I pick up food, the first thing I do is I get it home and I put it in a glass container. But these things end up in our landfill and they end up being burned, and then there are particulates in the air and they end up in our waterways, and we do enhance our bodies by not using these chemicals if possible. Another great thing I like to do, for example, everyone buys their laundry detergent. This is another plastic container that has to be recycled or it's going to be burned in the incinerator. There are little things you could do. You could buy sheets. You could use little tabs like this that dissolve in the water, and you have less waste that you're putting into the system and the environment. One of my pet peeves in the way that you could protect yourself is, who here drinks with a Keurig? I love Keurig coffee. Okay, we got a couple. These plastic pods are full of polyurethane and chemicals, so when you heat plastic, you're actually exuding the chemicals out of the plastic and absorbing it in your body. So they make other coffee filters that are more paper-based. And I was so proud of my son because I finally talked him into going from this to these, which are even better. They're just fiber mesh with a little foil on top. So when you consider what you're putting in your body and what you're exposing yourself to, every little bit counts. Another thing I do, if I buy something like this, I save the bottle, I reuse it. I try to use this instead of plastic water bottles, although I'm not perfect. Grocery store, 70s, everything was about plastic bags, everybody must use plastic. I never ask for plastic bags if I don't have a bag of my own. Definitely paper would be a much better option to ask for. We need to get less plastic in the environment. And of course, a reusable bag is always the best option if you could do that. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on is just we have cumulative impacts to our bodies. We need to know that children, if you have grandchildren or children, it's much greater on them because they're a smaller human. So if you have someone in your family and you see they're feeding them baby food out of a plastic pouch, which is very common today instead of a glass jar, or heating up a baby bottle in the microwave in a plastic bottle, all of those things are cumulative impacts on our body. So one thing I'm excited about is we are going to be moving forward with these new PCB limits on what can be discharged into our rivers. And there's a new toxic task force that is beginning. It actually started last month, and Jerry's a part of it, John's a part of it, I'm a part of it. And we're going to be working in collaboration with governmental agencies, and we need to work in a collaborative way, a team effort, because there are solutions. And a lot of it is about, educating the public, educating children, waste minimization, better choices with chemicals that we choose to use, thinking twice before we pour something down the drain or flush it down the toilet. Those are all ways we can make a positive difference. And as Jerry mentioned, in the summer months, if any of you have been to the river lately, you've noticed our water levels are extremely low. It's very concerning. And what happens is the temperatures rise in the water when we have the lower levels. The chemicals that we're discharging into the river, well, they're not slowing down, right? So we're just compounding the impacts and have more concentrated chemicals in the river, which is impacting our wildlife, impacting fish that want to spawn. And the old algae blooms, some of you have probably heard of this, and it's pretty typical. When the water rises, we have algae blooms in our rivers and our waterways, and it promotes, invasive species, which we do not want to do, but it also takes a lot of oxygen out of the water, and our fish need oxygen to survive, so does the aqua life. So water usage and cutting back on that is so key. I cannot stress it enough, as Jerry already touched on. They have an amazing program through the city of Spokane called Waterways. They will pay you $800 up to 3 times for sections of your yard if you switch from sprinklers and, say, grass and heavy shrubbery to a drip system and drought-tolerant plants like lavender and beautiful things that butterflies and hummingbirds need in the summertime anyway. So considering doing that, I think, is a key, because our population's rising in Spokane. Let's admit it, the secret's out. We can't hide it anymore. A lot of people want to live here. And as our population grows, we're going to be using more of our natural resources. And to me, the most important natural resource is our water. So any way that we could try to minimize that, something I recently did at my home is I diverted my rain gutters to where I have the ability to water plants and deep water trees in my yard, opposed to letting it go down a pipe and into the storm drain. So even little things like that could make a positive difference. But I just want to say thank you all for being here. And I know that we need to break now. It's 3:00, and this has been a lot of information. I would love to open up for questions if anybody has any. And in the meantime, during our break, I want to thank Cheryl Miller-Arndt for her beautiful piano playing. And could you stand up, Cheryl? I'd just love to acknowledge you. Thank you so much for your gift. And then Courtney Litwin with her beautiful photographs of the waterfowl. Could you stand up, Courtney? Thank you so much for sharing your gift with us. And I spoke to Courtney and I just said, the theme today is about river and waterways, and she said, oh, no problem, I'll just make a slideshow of all of the waterfowl. And I was so impressed by her gift. And that's the other thing we need to keep in mind is when we do these things, we're not only protecting ourselves as humans, but we're protecting birds and bears that depend on birds and bald eagles that eat fish. And one thing I promised I would touch on that Courtney brought to my attention is lead is a very important issue in our riverways. Lead sinkers, pellets, anything that a swan, for example, could ingest, or a fish, it unfortunately could be their demise. So just being aware of that and being good stewards of our environment and our river is key. So I would like to invite you all to please go have a snack. We have so much food out there. Julie, you've done an amazing job on that. Actually, could I ask all of my Earth Care volunteer team to stand up? I just want to acknowledge and thank you before break for putting this all together. Thank you so much. And enjoy yourselves. And when we come back, we're going to take a 15-minute break. We're going to have John Hancock speak, who has amazing knowledge and represents the West Plains Water Coalition. And we do have the Lands Council here, and we have Melissa, who's going to touch on wonderful things that they're doing to plant trees along our waterways and ensure keeping our water temperatures low, which prevents algae blooms and all these wonderful things. So unless anyone has any questions for me, enjoy yourself. Does anyone have any questions?
Just wanted to thank you for.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I love to bring people together, and I'm sorry I'm having to compete with such a beautiful day today. But we will have another one of these in the future, and I really believe the key is education. And I'll share a quick story with you. I have a neighbor, he's a retired eye surgeon, and he has been battling cancer, unfortunately, for a couple years. He's already exceeded the time the doctors told him he would have to live. And when I asked him, I said, Jerry, what are you doing for your water source? And he said, well, I've always just drank out of the tap. And I said, please don't do that anymore. And he said, why? And I explained a couple issues to him, and he said to me, wow, if I would have known this 20 or 25 years ago, I might not have cancer. So I'm not trying to scare anyone, but it's for people like that that hit me in my heart and make me want to do events like this and organize things just to educate people, because we do need to protect ourselves. And I know John has some wonderful literature at his table on ways we could filter our water. I know Joan brought her Birkin, which is a wonderful way, and that's, excuse me, what you're drinking today is Birkin water. There are reverse osmosis systems you could put in your house. You could do them under the counter. You can use pitchers that have charcoal filtration. So I would just urge you all to do that and urge your family members to do it. As a matter of fact, a lot of my family members don't know it yet, but they're going to be getting this new state-of-the-art water pitcher filtration device for Christmas. So just a thought. Anyway, thank you all very much.
you for helping.
That's me. Am I in the way? And the clicker, you using that? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Jeff. If we can get if everybody can kind of make their way back, we'll stay on time and on task here. All right, everyone, if we can grab your snacks. And actually, I had a thing on my notes here about having snacks in the sanctuary, but we do have a service tomorrow. We're trying to minimize the amount of time we have for cleanup afterwards, but since we're looking at nuts and things like that, maybe we'll take good care of it. I do want to say that the bags, we're trying to be very purposeful and have paper bags. And Pat from our Earth Care has got a couple of compost bins out there. So when you're done with your bag, you can simply tear up your bag and put it in that compost, and it goes to into the bins, and it goes to a composting bin that she has, I believe at Haystacks, right? Yep. So we appreciate your cooperation on that. Also appreciate you visiting our tablers out there in their booth or in their tables and displays. We appreciate everyone that has put something together for us to help educate us. Okay, our next presenter is going to be John Hancock, not the John Hancock from years and years and centuries ago, but we have the John Hancock, who's part of the West Plains Water Coalition. John's going to come up and talk to us for a bit, so we'll welcome John.
Well, the reason you've not heard of us is we're brand new. And so the 50-year history of the river cleanup, we're just getting started. Since December, about 20 of my neighbors came to my house to talk about bad water from the Air Force Base. And the alarm has been spreading. Just a few months before that, a neighbor lady from down the street, who I hadn't seen in a while, lost her husband to pancreatic cancer, her mother to breast cancer, two big boxer dogs to cancer. And then the Air Force came and tested her water and said, "Lady, you shouldn't be drinking this water anymore." She got bottled water delivered the next day. Then she got a contract from the Air Force that said, "We'd like to put a filter on your house." She was treated poorly by the Air Force. She said to me, "I don't know what to do, can you help?" And I learned from the Buddhists that if someone asks you to help, it's good to say yes. And I learned from Jesus that it's good to be good to your neighbors. And in Boy Scouts, they taught me how to learn how to do hard things. So I just said yes to my neighbor, and it's been a whole rolling downhill since October, just a year ago. So thanks, Monica, for the invitation to come and talk. And I have to understand this subject in a very simple way, because I didn't go to science school, I didn't go to engineering school, I didn't go to political science school, I went to music school. So my way of simplifying this is necessary for me to get it, and I hope you get it too. And this is a subject that doesn't affect us only on the West Plains, because it's in our lives. So this PFAS substance is a fancy acronym for 12,000 kinds of synthetic chemicals. And unlike arsenic and lead and radon and uranium and all those sorts of toxic poisons. This is not a naturally occurring substance. So wherever you find it, including Antarctica in the penguins, it was all manufactured in a factory. And the story really begins in the military-industrial complex, which every time there's a new war, there's unlimited amount of money spent to win the war by inventing some new kind of way to kill things. And the story of Teflon begins for us as a consumer product actually at Hanford, because the plutonium enrichment there at high temperatures, high corrosiveness, just a terrible contained environmental disaster, used Teflon in gaskets and bearings and metal coatings because it was indestructible. So the idea of a forever chemical, which is designed to be indestructible, got that way not by accident, but on purpose. So at the other end of the spectrum on Hanford is the piece of wax paper in the bottom of your takeout pizza box, which keeps the grease from going into the cardboard. Think PFAS. And the slick stuff on your waxed dental floss used to be wax, now it's PFAS. And the ski wax that you now put on your skis, ski wax just keeps getting better and better and more expensive, and you can even buy skis that don't even need wax because they have this slick coating. So you can imagine this feel of something that feels oily, feels waxy, feels greasy, but it doesn't come off. That's the chemical that we're talking about. This 12,000 kinds of synthetic chemicals. And here's the way they make it. Electrolysis is sort of the opposite of the lead acid battery in your car. So electricity is produced by sulfuric acid with lead, and the electricity comes out of the chemistry. Electrolysis is the opposite. You put electricity into the chemistry, and in the container, something new and magic happens. And so imagine the electrolysis of gasoline. Sounds like a nice explosion, but it takes air to make gasoline explode. So take the air out and replace it with fluorine, which is a very corrosive gas. That was the mustard gas in World War I, was fluorine. So in this chamber of fluorine with electricity going into gasoline makes a carbon chain, 8 atoms of carbon in a row, and fluorine just sticks onto this carbon chain in all different ways. And all of the different ways are engineered to make all these different kinds of PFAS chemicals, depending on what it is. And so PFOA, PFOA, and PFOS are two of the most famous ones. And those are the two that most frequently show up in a water test. And then there's one called PFHXS, which is the specific kind of fluorocarbon in firefighting foam. And that's the trouble on the West Plains. So if we come back a little bit more chemistry, many of you have been around to read Silent Spring. Remember Rachel Carson and DDT and in the 60s, which is how we got to the original environmental protection, was about DDT. And DDT is a chlorinated carbon chain. So the chemistry is a little bit like a fluorinated carbon chain. And DDT was great at killing bugs. And the recovery from the world of DDT affected us here in bald eagles and fish. And the bald eagle population was threatened in a serious way because of DDT. But here's the distinction. The toxicity of DDT was measured in parts per million. Parts per million was enough to make DDT poisonous. And PFAS in the environment is poisonous at parts per trillion. And a trillion is a million million. So PFAS toxicity is 1 million times worse in the arithmetic than even DDT was, a million times worse. So imagine a drop of water in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, one drop. That's parts per trillion. That's how serious this is. So we read a lot in the paper now about PFAS in the consumer environment. And Jerry mentioned that many Americans have PFAS in their blood. How many of you have Gore-Tex clothing in your closet? Well, Gore-Tex, after Teflon, was the next big thing because it's waterproof, it's breathable, you don't get sweaty because it's not plastic. But here's how the magic chemistry works of Gore-Tex. These PFAS chemicals have a molecular opposition to water as a fluid. So you can't make a fabric that's woven tight enough to keep water out. Hemp is the next best thing, by the way. So the way of keeping the water out is to put PFAS on it because the PFAS repels the water. Water vapor can go through, air can go through, but liquid water can't go through. That's the magic of Gore-Tex. And back to Teflon for a minute. You've probably by now thrown away all your Teflon pans because when you heat this up to 400 degrees, which is the degrees to make muffins, it's enough to release some of the chemistry that went into the Teflon to start with. And I remember a sister-in-law in Toledo, Ohio, who was a parrot breeder. And she knew from the bird world that the fumes from hot Teflon kill birds. So it's the modern version of the canary in the coal mine that she knew about in the early 90s. Well, it took me a lot longer than that to get rid of the Teflon pans in my house, even though she had gotten rid of them in her house. So these PFAS in human blood all around the world, again, it's a totally man-made chemical. Every molecule was created. And so we Americans with Teflon, with ski wax, with waterproof mascara, all of those slick, oily, stain-proof chemicals. Stainmaster carpet, for instance, which is good. If you have a baby that spits up on the rug, it's good to have Stainmaster carpet, except for the baby. It's also in AstroTurf. So young people who now play soccer on AstroTurf, that's a question mark. But I want to make the point that in the West Plains, the PFAS in the groundwater from firefighting foam at the Air Force Base and at the airport is about 50 times the level of the background from all of these other consumer goods. So think 50 times, and we know that because CDC made a nationwide study of blood PFAS in high-risk communities, and West Plains was the award winner. 8 times more on one of these chemicals, 5 times more on another, and 50 times worse on the kind of PFAS that's in firefighting foam. So compare these neighbors in this map with the average American with some low level, 50 times worse. So when you hear about PFAS in the newspaper, and it's in mascara and it's in pizza boxes, that's good to know. And I'm glad you're here today to listen to a little bit about that. But that's everybody and it's everywhere. And it's a talking point by the manufacturers, not by the health people. So the manufacturers are trying to reassure us that there's nothing really to do about it because it's such a fine set of products and this is the price we pay for convenience in America. That's fine to know, but not us. Not the 20,000 people in this part of Spokane. So the highlights on this map are Fairchild Air Force Base is here in the tan on the left, and the big blank spot on the right, that's the airport. And Highway 2 goes straight across at the top, and I-90 is the curved line down here. So that's the context. The red border is the extent of the West Plains aquifer. And if you drive around the West Plains, it looks like just a nice big prairie. But keep in mind that that prairie up there is 400 or 500 feet higher than the river. So it's all downhill pretty dramatically from the airport to the river. And if you've ever ridden your bike from downtown up to the West Plains, you know what that feels like. And it's safe and it's convenient to build airports at the top of the hill. And almost everywhere except in Peru, that's what we do. Makes sense. But that means the water pollution from 2 airports runs downhill towards the river through my neighborhood. And my home is there a light here? Yes? No. At the top, on that squiggle to the left, on Deep Creek, that's where I live. And if anybody had said, John, I hear you live out by the Air Force Base, I'd say, no, it's 7 miles away. It's over the hill. We get the planes, but it's a long ways away. But since 1970, PFAS from firefighting foam has been running down the hill towards my house, towards our river. And it took a lawsuit, a class action suit in West Virginia that investigated a Teflon factory run by DuPont. It took 12 years to prove that all the poison water and the birth defects in the Ohio River flowed downstream from a Teflon plant in West Virginia. It's the subject of a discouraging documentary called Dark Waters and an accompanying book by the same attorney called Exposure. So if you want to dig more into the history of what we know about this and the history of the cover-up by 3M and DuPont, that's the place to go. It's been a primer for all of us. So DuPont, when it was founded in 2010 or 1910, something like that, as a chemical company, until the 1970s, they had a very sophisticated research arm that seemed to practice toxicity stewardship. And they were discovering the hazards of everything they invented and pretty much sharing that information with the public. And they actually stopped making chemicals that they themselves discovered were too poisonous to let loose. But something shifted in their business model around 1980, and they went into secrecy. And the reason we know about the details of the toxicity in that Teflon factory was all of those DuPont employees got free medical care from their employer. And so all the medical records for 50 years were in the hands of the company, and so they had the facts of what the relationship was between the health troubles of their own employees in the factory and what the world of healthy people had. And they hid that documentation until this class action suit in West Virginia. So it's a discouraging story, but it's a good way of getting a handle on the meaning of this, not just in the West Plains, but throughout the country. So the red dots here on this map, we call this the measles map. Each of those red dots is a private well on the West Plains. So these are my neighbors. There are now 150 of them that have joined our organization to figure out what to do about this. In the cross-hatched part of the map, the Air Force started testing in 2017. They've now tested about 400 wells in that zone, and a quarter of them are polluted enough to deserve filtering. So stop drinking the water, we'll bring you a filter system. So about 100 households, those red dots in that area, including a whole row of people on my street. So across the road, down the road, are people with PFAS levels anywhere from 40 up to 250. And my well is non-detect, right in the middle of the clump. Deep Creek runs through our property. We've got one of the oldest houses in the neighborhood with a well that's not very deep. It's just 90 feet. And so there haven't been any scientists that have come over and said, here's why your well's clean. But my guess is the PFAS running downhill in the bottom of the Paleo Channel has the poison water at the bottom of the gravelly flow, it's the same side view as Jerry talked about us, and my well doesn't go down far enough to get into it. So the neighbors with deeper wells have more trouble. Because PFAS doesn't just blend equally with groundwater. It's affected by the temperature, by the pH, by all the other chemicals that are present in the natural water, makes it behave differently. The specific gravity is 1.06, which means it's slightly heavier than water, and sometimes it's in the bottom of the flow, sometimes it's mixed up with the flow. On the West Plains, there are seasonal variations in the water table level. So sometimes there's a lot of water at a person's house, other times the well level goes up and down, and there's not been enough science yet to discover what the pattern is. And if the ratio holds of the Air Force test zone, where a quarter of the wells are unsafe and 3/4 are fine, if we project that over the 1,400 wells on the West Plains, not everybody is in trouble. But the effect on real estate value of these bad stories in the paper makes a whole lot of people freak out. And some of them don't want a well test. They'd rather not know what's in their water. And some of them are not happy with me for making all this fuss about bad stuff on the West Plains. So there's a whole cultural, societal uneasiness and uncertainty about exactly what the circumstances are. And so that gets us then a little bit more to the purpose of the West Plains Water Coalition. These are the 4 questions that are at the root of our educational curriculum for the public, not just in the West Plains, but further away. So the first question is, what's this PFAS all about? So it's understanding the part of the story that I'm trying to tell, not just with our story, but stories of other agencies, other scientists, other studies, all that. And we try to publish it at the layperson's level. So the guys with flannel shirts and feed caps can join into the project because it affects them. So the way of simplifying the story and making it a community issue is really important to the role of the coalition. The second question, how does it affect me? So if we go back to that map, the way it affects me depends on where my house is. And one of the recent projects is that the airport used the same firefighting foam from mid-1970s until 2017. Same product, not as much of it, but the same product. And in 2017, when the Airway Heights city wells were shut down for contamination, the airport dug some test wells on their own property to see about their water. Sure enough, they had PFAS in their water too, but they kept it secret. So it wasn't until last fall that a neighbor in the Palisades neighborhood, not far from the airport, did a public information request and got 1,000 pages of inside information from the airport that showed that they knew about PFAS all along. They talked with their attorneys, they talked with their lobbyists, they talked with their federal representative, and decided that this wasn't bad enough or it was damaging enough that it might get in the way of commercial development on the West Plains, which is what the county commission has been pretty enthusiastic about for as long as I've lived in Spokane. And so the state ecology department blew the whistle on the airport, started an investigation. They had enough inside information to determine that the groundwater pollution in the Palisades neighborhood, and when I say that, that's the green part of this map. And the Palisades, are that set of cliffs really at the edge here near town. So that half of the neighborhood has PFAS that is most likely from the airport. So ecology is moving rapidly to tell the airport how to clean up the mess. And there will be a public comment period around Christmas where the public has 30 days to tell ecology what we think about the cleanup plan at the airport. And you're all invited too. So one of the things, if you choose, is to sign up for our information list. We'll send you emails. On the table, there's a little form. We'd love to invite you into our public awareness project on the West Plains. And how does it affect you? Well, you get to decide about that, depending on where you live, what you want to do with consumer products, whether you know your county commissioners by name or not. We've got all different ways of engaging in this particular project, depending on how you think it affects you. The third question is, what should I do? Well, again, it depends on what your political interests are, what you think your medical sensitivity is to bad water, what you think about your grandchildren coming to visit. One of the uncertainties is a breastfeeding mother whose doctor says, well, there's PFAS in the water, therefore it's in your blood. Maybe you should go to formula instead. So if you mix up the formula, what sort of water do you use? Do you get a filter? Do you get bottled water? Depends on what brand of bottled water, because they're not all the same. And so here's this young mother doing her best for the health of her children, and it's an uncertain world. And we can't give certainty yet because the science is moving fast, but it's a long ways from certain. But we can help that young woman understand what she can do to help a little bit, given what the circumstances are right now. One of the documents that we have available to take home is a publication about water filter system for home use. And it's put out by the Washington Department of Health. So there's a national foundation that certifies water filtration systems, and there's a new test for PFAS. And so it's a water filter system like the Berkey, and I have one of those in my house, that has been tested to assure us that PFAS is filtered out of the water. So we're not certifying home use. We're simply handing out documentation made by other people that we trust. And that's our way of building trust in the organization, is to use verified information that we provide to you. So we're not doing field tests. We don't have any scientists doing experiments. But we're trying to gather all the updated information we can. And we've got a set of about 10 science advisors who are helping us with specific aspects of expertise that we volunteer leaders don't possess. What will the government do? This, unlike the Trent rolling mill, is a government-caused problem. There are no manufacturers on the West Plains that are the source of the problem. So it's the airport and the Air Force, both government agencies doing what they were instructed to do, with consequences that I'm unhappy about and my neighbors are unhappy about. So the solutions are not just chemical, physical, scientific. They're not just money. They're the fact that the emitters that are two government agencies that are really big. So we have a political problem here to get the authorities to embrace what I think is the public health duty that they're given by regulation. In Washington, the Washington Department of Ecology actually was established a year earlier than the federal EPA. And I'm proud of that as a Washingtonian. I didn't know what a liberal place this was until I moved here from Ohio. But we Washingtonians got started real early on the idea that we should protect the environment. And the state constitution says something like, all the water in Washington belongs to all the people. That's a great idea. But as Jerry pointed out, most of the energy around that is how much do you get, not how clean is it. So all the energy around about water rights is about taking it out of the ground and using it, not protecting it. So I have imagined a level of stewardship for clean groundwater that I'm just making up, because we don't find it in state regulations very thoroughly, especially if you happen to live on a red dot outside the city. And this is a big hole in the regulation system in Washington. At the federal level, the Clean Drinking Water Act empowers the EPA to set the standards that every state has to use in its public water systems. So if you drink water from the city, you can bet that that's clean water, because the Department of Health is using federal money to investigate and solve and fund and encourage and do all that. But about 15% of Washingtonians live outside municipal water. That's 3,000 of us on the West Plains. And so we have to look to the Department of Ecology to protect our water. But when we look in the Department of Ecology, they say, sorry, drinking water doesn't count. Once you take it out of the ground, you've gone beyond our authority. So we can't help you with drinking water because we're just groundwater. So that's why this neighborhood association has to put our hand up and say, now what about? That doesn't sound like a very good idea. Some states have backfilled rural wells with state money. We haven't done it yet in Washington. So if you'd like to put some energy towards clean water in general, it would help rural people all over the state, not just us. Put your hand up. We'd like to give you a turn. And the Washington governor's new Eastern Washington representative, a guy named Luke Jasmine, I've known for a while, he said to me the governor would like to get some big stuff done before his term's over. And I said, we need $1 million to test wells and put on filter systems in the Palisades area. That's the green on the map. And I said, I don't know whether that's big enough to fit the governor's category of doing a big thing. But for us in that neighborhood, that's a really big thing. The fight between the Spokane Regional Health District over the COVID shutdown in 2020 still reverberates here by the health district lost some of its best people, lost its nerve on public health, and that agency hasn't recovered from the pandemic yet. And so this discovery of PFAS in the West Plains sort of corresponds in time with the idea that the public health department has fallen down on the job, in my opinion. And so since 2017, people in the Palisades have been drinking poisoned water that the airport knew about, and nobody held them to the task. So stay tuned in the newspaper for more manifestations of this particular story. It might be as soon as tomorrow in the Seattle Times, who sent a team of reporters and photographers here, and they spent a week talking with my neighbors, talking with elected officials, studying their own maps in their own way from the environment desk at the Seattle Times. So I think that's in the newspaper tomorrow. We're trying to get traction also in the idea that this aquifer flows into the Spokane River. It doesn't just stop. And it seems like a really dry place in the world. There's not much surface water on the West Plains. 14 inches of rainfall a year is not very much. It's not like the water running down from Idaho. And so the depth and the wetness of our aquifer is nothing like the one that Jerry talks about. So we've got to be cautious about what happens in our aquifer. And there's the saying that dilution is the solution to pollution, which may be fine in the general sense, but it all gives us a pass to keep throwing stuff in a big river because it'll eventually just all go somewhere. Well, on the West Plains, it's not going somewhere. It's in the water. There was a Seattle Times article about a firefighter from Spokane originally who worked at SeaTac. And they had a firefighter hazing project when a new firefighter came on with the firefighting foam. So imagine these firefighters shooting shaving cream out of a 4-inch hose hooked up to a fire truck. That's how you put out burning airplanes. And the magic of this chemistry is it makes a barrier between air and fuel. And if you ever took cooking, you were instructed if your skillet catches on fire on the stove, can't put it out with water. So it's the same idea of you can't put out a fuel fire with water. So the foam is the magic solution to burning airplanes and burning fuel tankers. And there was a Navy was involved in the invention of this firefighting foam back in the mid-70s because there was a Navy one of those ships that the planes last, carrier, sorry, and that caught fire and 200 sailors died. It was called the Forrestal. That was in 1970, I think. So the Navy said, we've got to do something different about fuel fires on ships, because what do you do? Where do you go? So the Navy helped DuPont invent this foam. That's where it came from. And so at SeaTac, this firefighter eventually died of some kind of cancer. And his case was the first time in Washington that a wrongful death from cancer was attributed to firefighting foam. It's the first time that there was a link made between that man's cancer and his job. And the fire chief at SeaTac has been very cooperative with the investigation there. One of the facts is that they trained with this AFFF firefighting foam twice a year at SeaTac. At Fairchild, they trained 2 or 3 times a month. From mid-90s, mid-70s until 2017. And so that's the difference in potency that led to this 50 times the average of the potency of what we have in the West Plains. That's how serious this is. Glad for questions.
I was hoping you could touch a little bit more on the concerns, which is one of my largest concerns, of the PFAS flowing to our aquifer or to the Spokane River and what those impacts may be.
Well, the difference in how much water there is in the river and how much water there is under the ground in West Plains is pretty big. So these cubic feet, millions of cubic feet per second is a lot of water. And it may be that since the PFAS has stopped being used at the airports since 2017, that we're gradually, the flow will be diminished over time. But none of this has been studied long enough to know whether that's really true. And the potency in one of the wells at the Air Force Base is 189,000 parts per trillion. 189,000. And the EPA's health level is 70. So compare 189,000 with 70. That's how potent it is. So if it keeps going towards the river, who knows how much dilution in the river is going to be enough. And one of the odd things about it is the well that Jerry talked about, that Arroway Heights would like to put in the river down by 7 Mile, is downstream from the trouble. And I don't know about you, but going upstream from the trouble to find clean water makes a whole lot more sense. But there's not enough water to find if you go further uphill. So Jerry's idea that climate change and reducing hydrogeology levels is a concern to all of us. Whether it's polluted or whether it's clean, we've got that problem. Either way.
Can I ask one more question? This is another concern I have. So I don't know if everyone in this room understands, but Airway Heights within city limits depends on Spokane water. So the city of Spokane began piping water from the aquifer to Airway Heights in 2018, is my understanding. So that is a large population to take on for the long term, I see, to be supplying water from the aquifer to an area that was once dependent on groundwater. So would you see that as also being an additional impact of our water needing to be conserved? Because this may go on for decades, wouldn't you agree?
Well, it would make sense that when Airway Heights stopped taking 1 million gallons a day out of the aquifer, the creek at my house would have gone up. To stop pumping out of a contaminated aquifer meant that there was more water left. But it hasn't been enough of a change to help the aquifer overall, because the creek behind my house, Deep Creek, has been dry now for 2 years. So we had beavers, they ate all the willows, and then the willows went away. And now the cottonwoods are dead, and what was water this deep when I moved there is now totally dry. So the aquifer is going down. There needs, in my opinion, we should stop building on the West Plains until a reliable source of water is found. And the geology on the West Plains is really unusual, because it was a volcanic world, not with Hawaii explosions, but with oozes. And then there was the Montana floods that just washed all the dirt away. And then there were ice ages and just all sorts of interesting stuff. So it looks like just a flat wheat field when you drive by, but under the ground there's big drama. And how the water flows and where it doesn't is really a complicated project for any of us to understand.
We got a question back here.
I was just going to bring up kind of interesting or weird question / idea, but kind of going off of the intermediary time, however you say that, would there be a way to like somewhat individually filter or osmosis filter the wells per household until something bigger is done?
Yes, so there's several ways around that. The simplest is a Brita pitcher with a specialized cartridge that goes in it. And those cartridges come in two flavors. One is granulated charcoal, which is similar to what the Berkey has. And the other is a new invention of cornstarch. So somehow cornstarch can be made sticky enough that the PFAS sticks to it, and it's disposable. And the brand that I bought, I put it back in the package and send it back to the company, and they claim to be disposing of it in an environmentally sound way. But the granulated charcoal just goes in the garbage, and it goes to the incinerator and gets burned up, but it's a forever chemical. So where it goes after it gets incinerated, it just goes away. But reverse osmosis also works, and there are lab-certified versions of that. And so reverse osmosis provides a clean glass of water, but 3 glasses of water go through with the PFAS that's been concentrated in it. So it's just a concentration change. When you purify this part, you dirty that part. And at my house, it would go into my septic field, which is connected to the groundwater. So I'm not taking any PFAS out of the groundwater, I'm just making myself a clean glass of water. So that's not the thing that I prefer, but if you have city water or city sewer, and your PFAS goes into the city sewer, then it goes downstream to what Jerry was talking about. And does the city filtration system take out PFAS? I don't know, but that's the problem. And a friend of mine who lives on Whidbey Island, he's got PFAS in his neighborhood from the Navy base. He's a chemist. So he peeled the label off of his under the sink filter system, and it was made by 3M. And he peeled the label off the other one, it was made by DuPont. So the same companies that caused the problem are now profiting on the cleanup. But back to your question. So the Brita filter is the $50 startup on PFAS filtration. For $169 at Home Depot, you can buy 2 cartridges that go under your sink. And then in the $3,000 to $6,000, you can get a big one in the basement that sort of goes next to your water softener system, sort of in line with what you have for a lot of money. And that means you can take a shower also with clean water. So the chemical solutions are available. There's a flyer out there that can give you all the costs and the alternatives and the specific products. And the Air Force is filtering homeowners with a huge shed in the backyard, 8 by 12, a tough shed, looks like what you get from Ziggy's. And there's 3 huge containers of granulated charcoal that filter the water for your house. But my neighbor Marcy said, but they wouldn't let me water my greenhouse with Air Force filtered water. And they didn't like me feeding it even to my dogs. They said, no, this is drinking water. This is for you and the people in your house, not for your farm. And so, speaking of farms, if you drive around very far on the West Plains, you'll figure out this is an agricultural world. So what's a farmer supposed to do with 100 acres of wheat that he can't filter with Air Force water? He can't irrigate with bottled water. What's he supposed to do? There are 1,000 people who are part of several class action cases on the West Plains that are now in a bellwether case in South Carolina. They don't know. And I keep trying to find somebody at WSU Agriculture who will come to tell us about PFAS in agriculture. They don't have anybody there that claims any knowledge. And the DOH, nice flyer about agriculture and pets, basically says, we don't know for sure. So they published an instruction guide that says, we don't know. So there's still a lot of uncertainty about that. But anything we can do to improve the water we can drink, I think helps us either in a little way, chemically, or in a bigger emotional way because we're actually doing something that we're choosing. And if we have to wait for government to come to our rescue, we may be waiting a long time.
So I'll just give a very quick, succinct little comment from a Riverkeeper standpoint on this, because it is an interrelated issue, as John's brought up. You know, we took some PFAS tests last summer and did find a positive bump below a wastewater treatment plant in the effluent. We can't say really conclusively anything more than presence, right? Presence or absence, that's it. And we did this in order to try to, then comment on the permit at a wastewater treatment plant to say, please begin to monitor the influent and the effluent. Now that's a different kind of PFAS. The family of PFAS we found belonged to Scotchgard and some of these household products, which is slightly different than what is plaguing the West Plains with the firefighting foam. So all I can say for the river, in asking that question up on the slide that John has there, how does this affect me? For me, it's how does this affect the river? And we know that coming in from point sources, we do most likely have PFAS. Coming in from the West Plains, from these paleo channels, I don't know if it's coming in from Deep Creek, we probably do have PFAS coming in. The issue for us is that in terms of actually proactively or reactively doing something, typically, without a water quality standard, a legal standard in the river, it's very difficult then to work backwards from. I mean, in many ways, my work, we use things like water quality standards to say, hey, listen, these standards are being violated or they're close to being violated, and we can leverage that and make some progress. So from a river standpoint, we're still at this place where the EPA is recommending some things, but we don't quite have the tools to incite and motivate the big players to begin moving on this. Like I say, we've asked in the press even, and we actually were denied that the influent and effluent would not be tested in this cycle of permits for PFAS. So that's where we're at, in terms of at least my knowledge of the river. And I think this question of PFAS coming from the firefighting foams through these paleo channels, through Deep Creek, is yet another strand of this story that needs to be watched and is very interesting, but that's...
We're a citizens organization. All volunteers, just neighbors. And the regulators and the laws speak a language that I'm not familiar with. But the neighbors who tell their stories, that's who I'm in business to serve. So if the regulators are going slow, the politicians can go much faster because they make the laws and they work for us. So the target of our organization is a little bit different than the target of Jerry's organization. And I'm too new at this to come anywhere near giving up because it's a forever chemical. And there are people in my neighborhood who've lived on the family farm for 100 years. They're not giving up either. And most of them vote. And a year from now, the commissioner from our neighborhood will be up for election. So between now and then, he can do a lot or he can do a little. And we're hoping that he listens to what we have to say. And I bet he'd listen to what you have to say, whether you live in our neighborhood or not.
I have one question, but I want to ask, it's been dogging me ever since you spoke earlier, Jerry. What about the de-icer that they spray on the streets?
Great question.
Do I want to know?
Well, it's a kind of chloride. It's sodium chloride or it's magnesium chloride. And what it does in water is a chemistry problem, not a neurophysical, doesn't cause the same level of fluorine trouble. And the related question is, what about the de-icer at the airport? It's a corn-based, alcohol-based chemical that's designed to be safe when used as directed, and it degrades pretty fast in the ground. So the de-icer at the airport is not the same as the firefighting foam. And the other question is, what about when the forest fire, when they fly over with the airplane and put that red stuff out? That's not PFAS either, because that's not a fuel fire. That's more like ammonium. It's a fertilizer, think of a fertilizer product that helps to diminish the forest fires. It's not PFAS.
So I just have a quick question. Has any of this water issue on the West Plains impacted any of the residential or commercial development?
Well, there's a 150 home manufactured home park on North Craig. That's a mile outside the city limits. Their water table has been going down. They're now, they have insufficient water, so they're metering it out very carefully among the households. They appealed to the city of Airway Heights, which is a mile away, to say, can we pay for a pipe to bring city water a mile to our neighborhood? City said, no, we don't have enough to share. Leave us alone, sorry. And so she applied to ecology to be able to drill the well deeper in hopes of finding more water deeper down. Ecology said, no, you may get into PFAS that makes the situation worse, even though you find more water. So here's 150 homes with no solution inside. Great Northern School is one of the smallest school districts in Washington. 36 kids, kindergarten through 8th grade. They all serve a neighborhood right around the school. They are in the PFAS plume. In 2017, the wife of the fire chief in Airway Heights was on the school board at Great Northern School. She said, maybe we should test our water at the school. They did. They found PFAS in their water. They called up DOH, which regulates their school water, and they said, yeah, you got to get a filter right away, because stop drinking this water. So they called their Culligan man, and because they had a water softener, they had some bacteria trouble, so they had in their well shed a nice Culligan system. So Culligan said, yeah, for $10,000 we'll add on a PFAS filter. So they did that. They then called up DOH to give them an update, and they said, DOH said, no, sorry, that's not enough. You have to have an engineered project, and your Culligan guy did something that we don't approve of, so you got to start over. So they hired a water engineer to make a 50-page study and put his stamp on it, and they paid $40,000 for round 2 to get state regulation. State didn't give them a dime to help, and at the time, they didn't know enough about PFAS to even be able to specify what the Great Northern School should do. And a parent who knew part of this story because their kids were in Great Northern School told it to me. So in January, I went to see the Great Northern School, and they said, this is the first time ever a guy in a tie came to see us to help us with our water. And that's not right. That's not fair. That's not how protective government's supposed to work in the state of Washington. It shouldn't be up to me to listen to them talking about PFAS. Somebody else should be doing that. And that's what we got to fix.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you, John.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, John. That was very informative. So I just wanted to let everyone in the audience know, John has this handout on his table, which will give you options of ways you can filter your water. Jerry mentioned some, John mentioned some. I've been researching them as well for my own house. The point being, and because I'm not representing any particular organization here, I could say it, you need to protect yourselves. We need to use our own common sense and know that, yes, we have the Clean Water Act. For example, the standards that are required for municipalities to test for drinking water in the Clean Water Act does not include PFAS, it does not include PCBs, these forever chemicals that are cancer-causing that bioaccumulate in our bodies. They're not required to test for those. And I used to live in the city of Snoqualmie and uncovered and exposed a lot of things that were happening there that were being covered up. And the groundwater there is not being tested properly, I'll just put it that way. And there is a high rate of cancer in that community, unfortunately. So just That's what this event is all about. It's about informing the public and letting you know if you want to protect yourselves and your families, your loved ones, take it into your own hands and don't trust what you're just told, because John gave a perfect example that even though the regulatory agencies mean well, and I fully support them and I want to collaboratively work with them to find solutions, they do have limited funds, they have limited resources, they have rules and guidelines they have to follow. And one of my big pet peeves is there's very little oversight and enforcement to a lot of the regulations on the books. So that's what people like John and Jerry and I like to do, and Jim in the back, is try to hold some of these larger organizations like Department of Health or Ecology accountable, or EPA, for example, with the new PCB limits that will be set by the end of this year, accountable with the polluters, so they are held to account. And there is enforcement and repercussions if they're not following the rules and the guidelines. But in the meantime, I'm just here to say, you might want to pick this up, you might want to research it, and just protect yourself. So thank you so much, Sean, for that information.
Thank you, Monica. Hey, and I am proud to say, with all the question and answers and everything, we are on time. So, at 4:10, we had Melissa coming up from Lands Council, and she's going to come up and talk to us a little bit. You can just stand up there.
Oh, I'm a little short. Hello, my name's Melissa. I'm the volunteer coordinator with the Lands Council, and I'm super excited to be here with all of you guys today, learning about water. Our organization is an environmental nonprofit located in downtown Spokane, and our mission is to conserve and revitalize the lands of the inland Pacific Northwest. And we primarily do this through engaging our community in conservation events as well as education events. In order to achieve our mission, we have a variety of programs to address a variety of environmental issues and reach as much of our population in Spokane as we can. Our public lands program works with other conservation groups to protect public lands such as the Colville National Forest, National Wildlife Refuges, state, county, and also city lands against threats such as urban expansion, climate change, and wildfire threats. We also have a climate justice program that ensures that the work that we do can best serve underrepresented communities in our area as well as economically disadvantaged communities. One of our more recent programs, which was Spokane, just happened this past week. It's an urban tree planting where we planted 50 new trees in the northeast and west central neighborhoods of Spokane, which were historically red-lined neighborhoods. And so basically what's happened over the past few decades is that we can see that the map of the red-line neighborhoods in our area, which were neighborhoods which a few decades ago were designated for immigrant or low socioeconomic families. These red light neighborhoods were designated for those individuals, while people coming home from wars were like the neighborhoods such as South Hill were preserved for kind of those for veterans coming home from the war. And so basically the red line neighborhoods from decades ago mirror the canopy coverage that we have in our neighborhoods today. So we have figured out that these tree plantings are no longer an environmental issue, but they're here to resolve an equity issue as well. But in addition to all the urban stuff we do, work with public lands, a lot of our work ties into helping our waterways in the Spokane area. We do a lot of work with schools and education, and in addition to helping them plant trees, we also have helped our schools install a few rain gardens. The rain gardens use a combination of native plants and biochar. And biochar is a form of activated carbon. It is the byproduct of agricultural crops, and basically These rain gardens help to remove PCBs and I'm sure what we've been talking about for this talk helps to remove some chemicals from rainwater and stormwater before the water can reach our Spokane River. And in addition, we also do a lot of riparian forest plantings as well. Most recently, this past Saturday, we had over nearly 100 volunteers plant over 700 trees around the Thompson Creek area. Thompson Creek feeds into Newman Lake, and this is just like bodies of water that are around our Spokane area. And we also have other riparian plantings along tributaries for going to the Spokane River as well. But what these trees do is their roots will grow and help to stabilize the fragile stream banks and prevent phosphorus and nitrogen-laden sediment from entering our streams. Over time, the trees will also grow and provide a little bit of shade to help cool the water temperature of the creeks. And these cooler temperatures will better hold dissolved oxygen as compared to warmer water. And because Thompson Creek feeds into Newman Lake has been experiencing some algal bloom problems for the past few years. And algal blooms the growth will happen pretty suddenly from an influx of phosphorus and nitrogen and other nutrients from our creek. And then as the algae grows, eventually it starts to take up a big surface and runs out of room to grow, and then all the algae starts to die off. And as that algae dies off, it uses up oxygen, creating a more anaerobic environment, and it's not very good for our fish and wildlife. It also creates a pretty smelly environment for our residents nearby. So in addition to the environmental reasons, there's other reasons for why we're not a huge fan of algal blooms. So our tree plantings, especially in our riparian areas, in addition to reducing the phosphorus and nitrogen, which is the fuel source of our algal blooms, over time, by providing more shade to our creeks and lowering the water temperature, it also raises the amount of dissolved oxygen that is in our creeks and can lessen the impact of the algal blooms that do happen in our lakes. And also in our riparian areas, especially the one near Thompson Creek, we have something called BDAs, and these are beaver dam analogs, which are human-made beaver dams. And I'm not talking about the huge dams that have affected our salmon populations and everything in the Spokane River, around the Spokane River, but these are more smaller dams that are here to provide an ecological service that is lacking in our waterways that's needed, that beavers used to provide, but they don't anymore due to habitat degradation. And beaver dams, what they do is they help to increase the water table. By raising the water table, raising the amount of volume of water, it reduces the speed in which water in front of the dam can flow out of, and this, so because it's like a bigger, larger body of water as compared to a smaller area where there's a ton of water rushing through. Our beaver dams help to further prevent erosion and phosphorus and nitrogen-laden sediments from entering our streams. They also help to provide water to our riparian forest buffers and help to increase biodiversity and the health of those riparian forest buffers, which also helps to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus in our creeks and other riparian areas where our buffers are. Although I have not been involved in this part of work that my organization does because I'm a little bit new, we do also have staff that have spent time along the Spokane River, and they have spent some time posting and distributing health advisories indicating information about the toxic contamination of fish species, so that individuals from our community who there are some who depend on fishing from the Spokane River to feed their families, they are aware of which species to limit their consumption of. So as you can see, we're a small organization with each of us wearing many hats, but we are tiny but mighty, and we do try to do a lot for our Spokane community. And if any of you would like to sign up for our volunteer list to get involved with any of our spring tree plantings or any other events in the future, in the spring, we would love to have you. And my name's Melissa, I'm the volunteer coordinator. Super excited to be here, and I really appreciate the invite to be a part of this Events Day. So thank you guys.
Wow. There's hope. I'm impressed. You had no notes. You did all that off the top of your head. Well done. Do you have a class, do you need a recommendation from your teacher or whatever, instructor? Because there'll be glowing recommendations here on the presentation you just gave. Thank you so much. That was awesome. Okay. I'm just going to say we are 1 minute ahead. Are there any other questions that someone wanted to get in? Anything? No? John? You want your
I'd like to
pipe?
make an appeal. I'd like to make an appeal on behalf of all of these organizations. Coming out of the pandemic and this time when we all find plenty of things to argue about, if we set our mind to it, we can also find plenty of things to get together about. That's the world that I choose to be a part of. You can all choose that too, is to find something that you don't have to fight with your neighbors about because you have it in common, and get busy.
Thank you, John. Well, that's a great way to wrap this up. I want to thank all of you for being here and taking your time out in the afternoon to join us and be a part of this. And obviously, this will grow the next time. Monica said some thank yous earlier. I think she's got some more to say, but I just want to thank you all for being here and giving us the opportunity, and we'll do this again.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And that's what I wanted to do, is thank Jeff Tawney, our moderator. He did such a wonderful job today. And I wanted to thank you all for coming on such a beautiful fall day. As Melissa said, I do encourage you to please sign up for any of these wonderful organizations to be on their email list, and you can learn more about how you can make a difference. And I love what John just said, because the truth is, we're all in this together. We need to work together as a team in a collaborative way to find solutions, and there is hope. I think that Spokane has amazing volunteer groups in addition to governmental agencies that are really trying hard to make a difference and protect our health. So once again, I want to thank Sierra Club. A special thanks to Sierra Club, Morton and Page here today, and they made a donation toward this event, which I really appreciate. And I just want to thank you all for being here. Julie, I want to thank you. If you could stand up for the food display you put together. It was absolutely amazing. And these were all donations given. If anyone would like to donate, there are a few baskets around just to cover some of our costs. But overall, I just want to thank you all for being here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. And again, Cheryl, and thank you for the bird photographs as well, Courtney. They were just stunning. Thank you all.